phase creeps up on us in almost all areas of music production and sound design. It's a side effect, sometimes even a process that we deliberately go for. And it happens when you have two signals and one of them is time shifted. In other words, one signal will be offset by a specific amount to the other. Basically, the phase is the progression along the cycle of the waveform determined as degrees. And the best way to understand this is to actually cover it in an audio example. So what I'll do first is create a mono file. And we will synthesize a sine wave. Let's put this over a second. I've kept the amplitude quite low, and I'll explain to you why I've done that in a minute. And we'll have the sine wave at 60 Hertz. Let me just play that for you. So very simple sine wave at 60 Hertz at the amplitude that we set. Now if you look at this, you'll see that the waveform undulates, and that's how a sine wave behaves. Let me zoom in and I'll explain to you what a cycle is. Forget these values on the left now. I'll just explain this cycle as it is. It starts at 0, goes to a value of +1. Forget the fact that it's in decibels here. Drops back down to 0, goes to -1, and then back up to 0. This gray area is called one cycle. And if you were in the mood and you fancied counting, you'll find that in this 1 second timeline, there are 60 of these cycles. And those cycles determine the frequency of the audio file. The more cycles, the higher the frequency. Now let's talk about having two signals, and let's put one out of phase and see what happens. So in this instance, what I'm going to do is create a stereo file so that I can put one waveform on one channel and the other one on the other. There we go. And to make things easier to see, we'll change the duration. So we'll synthesize a sine wave again, and this time we'll just remove that. Put it at 1/10 of a second. So we have fewer cycles and it's easier to follow. Let me just play that. A number of things can take place now. If you have two identical waveforms, both in frequency and amplitude, and you sum the two to one channel, i.e. a mono channel, you will sum the amplitudes, which means this will become louder. If you look at the value on the right in the metering, we're around -7.5 dBs here. If I were to sum this to a single channel, waveform's amplitude has shot up, so this will be a lot louder. And that is what takes place when you sum two waveforms. Identical waveforms with the same frequencies and the same amplitudes. The frequencies don't need to be doubled or trebled or halved or whatever, but the amplitudes will sum and become louder. A cycle is determined in degrees. So a 360 degree phase is one complete cycle of a waveform, the one we covered here before. That's 360 degrees. Basically what that means is that, let's say you're standing in the middle of a room and you're looking ahead. If I said to you, turn 360 degrees, you would turn around and come back and face the way you were when you started. I.e., that's one full cycle, then we repeat it again. If it was 180 degrees out of phase, or 180 degree phase, we know that it would end up here. And basically what that tells us now is that, using the same analogy of you standing in the middle of the room, if you now turned so that you were facing backwards, that's called a 180 degree turn, or in this instance, a 180 degree phase. So in other words, you are now facing backwards. It's the exact opposite. Another easy way that I think of understanding this is think of this middle line as your mirror line, and that this is going to be reflected into that. Right now, they're totally in phase, and that's why we don't have a 180-degree turn. Nothing is mirrored. But if I select this and flip it or invert it, you'll see that the waveform is now 180 degrees out of phase. And you can tell that because it's literally a mirror image. If I play that, that's an out of phase signal. These are the side effects and sometimes exactly what we want from a specific effect. But we'll come on to that much, much later. The acid test here is what happens when you sum two signals together where one is 180 degrees out of phase. Now remember what we said earlier. You're in the middle of the room. You're facing forward. You turn around 180 degrees. You're now facing the other side of the room, i.e. backwards. Think of it as the Jedi and the Sith. If the Jedi Master and the Sith Lord were to meet and both had equal powers and fought each other, they'd cancel each other out. Well, I mean, I know that's fantastical, but you kind of get my drift. If I now sum these two, because we flipped this and it's 180 degrees out of phase, the peak of this waveform is directly above the trough of this waveform. The peak of this one is directly beneath the trough of that one. In other words, this is our mirror line. And if you understand any bit of physics, or even if you don't, and follow the Star Wars analogy, if you sum these two, that peak should cancel that trough, that peak should cancel that trough, and so on. So I'll play it once more. Now, let's go and sum this to mono. And what are we going to get? We should get silence. There you go. Nothing to play. Because both waveforms, because one is 180 degrees out of phase, have completely cancelled each other out. Let me undo that. Let me redo that. Cancelled. This teaches us something important now. If you have what we call partial phase cancellation, i.e. maybe it's at 90 degrees out of phase, or 45 degrees, or any value, what will happen is some frequencies will cancel out. Some will get summed with their amplitudes. This is why I showed you what happens when you sum earlier. In other words, parts of your audio signal will sound hollow because they'll be empty. Others will sound really grainy or metallic. Others will sound really loud and distorted or just loud. You get a lot of different anomalies. But there is a reason we love phase so much. And that's something that I will explain to you in all the processes that I'm going to cover in all my video tutorials. And because we're dealing with EQ at the moment, phase is a critical part of EQ. Certainly when you're talking hardware EQs or minimum phase designs. Right, what I want to do now is to create a sine wave, as we've been doing in mono. And then I'm going to send that to the DAW. So I'm going to save the file and then import it as an audio file in the DAW. Then I'm going to create a duplicate copy of it and then phase invert one or flip it and let you see what happens within the DAW when we change the gain values. So you will get summing and you will get cancellation. So let's create one here. Let's create a mono file. 24 bits fine. Now let's synthesize a sine wave. This time I'll put it in for 20 seconds at 0 because we're just going to use them as audio files within the DAW. Let's generate that. There it is. Let's play it back. Yep, that's fine. I've already created this already and saved it. I've called it sine phase mono. Now we can go to the DAW. I've created two audio channels here and I'm going to import the sine wave into both. So there we are. Now we'll go to the mixer page and have a listen to both of them together. You can see I brought the levels down here because when two waveforms are summed, their amplitudes grow. So let's just play that. Both at the same level, summed and outputting here. Great. Now if I phase invert this, and that flips this. So we're doing a 180-degree flip here. And if I play this now, you should hear nothing. But listen to what happens when I start changing the gain values of the inverted channel. Okay, it's playing and you're hearing nothing. If I take that out, you're hearing what was there. But if I invert it, we've got total phase cancellation, but you've got to be at the same levels. If I bring this down now, although we're cancelling, this one is dominating, getting louder and louder. If I bring this up, just at that point, we've totally phase cancelled. And here we're pushing this beyond. The reason I've done this particular tutorial is so that you understand what happens when you have a number of audio channels going and the phases aren't right, or the timings are out and you get partial phase cancellation. You end up with silence in certain parts, summing in others, and clashes in others. But we'll cover that in the summing tutorial and the ensuing tutorials that follow that. Thanks for your time.